Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going. As I like to point out each and every day, it expands our base. This morning, I am podcasting to you from Texas, from Austin. In fact, in just a few hours, we're going to be at the Lyndon B. Johnson Library, entirely appropriate on this day when it appears the Supreme Court is going to limit the Voting Rights Act. But more about that tomorrow, or, well, we'll get to it. But I want to talk this morning about foreign policy. There are two key elements that I think we need to explore. One is what's happening in Venezuela. Let's be clear. The United States, for all intents and purposes, is at war. Now, it doesn't require a declaration of war from Congress in order to go to war. What it requires is the President of the United States to instruct agencies to act. And that is what the President has done in a very public, and I might add, unprecedented fashion with the CIA. We are now performing the actions in Venezuela that are covert and which must, I tell you, be of great concern. Now, some have talked about a check on presidential power. We know from the War Powers Act that there is no check on presidential powers when it comes to foreign policy. Let me be clear. I had the opportunity to interview Senator Thomas Eagleton on a number of occasions. Tom Eagleton, most infamous for having run for vice president for 18 days with George McGovern, was the author of the War Powers Act. I've told you the story before, but I want to tell it to you again, because I heard Richard Blumenthal this morning, Senator Blumenthal, talking about the War Powers Act. What Tom Eagleton told me is that he was voting against the War Powers Act as the final legislation proceeded because it didn't limit presidential authority, it expanded presidential authority. So we now know that we have a president who can conduct the foreign policy the way he wants to do it. That's what he's doing. Now, there are some who will say that's a good thing. I'm going to suggest to you when it comes to Venezuela, there are a lot of question marks. The minute there is an authorization by the CIA to conduct covert operations, we have a serious problem. You may recall that when Gerald Ford was president, there was a decision that there could be no attempted assassination of any foreign leader by the CIA. Well, nobody's talking about assassinating Maduro, but what we are talking about is subverting his government. These are serious times. The president's statement that our jails and our immigration, rather, is being flooded because of the release from prison in Venezuela of all these criminals into the United States, frankly, has no foundation in fact. We know that. We know that. It's clear. It's precise. And yet the president is able to instruct as he wishes the CIA to conduct these efforts. I want you to understand how serious this is. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Venezuela this morning, but I do want you to understand this is the power of a president, unchecked. And I want to say that again, unchecked. Now let's leave Venezuela and turn to the Middle East. What Donald Trump did in securing the release of the hostages was phenomenal. But you will note that Gaza is in chaos, that Hamas, not disarmed, let me emphasize that, not disarmed, is now executing publicly its opponents. That the danger that exists in Gaza of full-scale war, not involving the Israelis, but involving Hamas and various Palestinian factions, is real. And the suggestion that the president has made that we put a couple of hundred American troops in to supervise all of this puts our troops in jeopardy. Now, I have to be clear. I am delighted the hostages are out, and I'm delighted that Donald Trump is receiving the accolades that he deserves. But this is not a peace process. Let's be crystal clear. This is a process which will lead to more chaos and the emergence of Hamas again as a political force. Do you understand? Hamas is committed to the destruction of Israel, pure and simple. They are determined to mount further operations to accomplish what they did when they, frankly, did such terrible damage to Israel just 2 years and a week ago. I want to point this out because I took some criticism from some of you for saying that this was not a peace, it was a ceasefire. It was a return of the hostages. Well, that was exactly what happened. And by the way, I even question whether there's a ceasefire, and everyone else is doing the same thing now. No surprise when it comes to Donald Trump and foreign policy. I want to return for a moment to the fact that I am here in Texas and will shortly, along with my wife, visit the Lyndon Johnson Library. One of the most celebrated successes of Lyndon Johnson's administration was the passage in 1964 of the Voting Rights Act, and it was a fascinating. By the way, I got that wrong. The Voting Rights Act is 65. The Civil Rights Act was 64. Two major achievements when it comes to liberation of minorities in this country and integration of minorities in this country. The Supreme Court is talking about limiting further the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And if, in fact, during this session they do that, it will be a major blow to what has been a successful attempt to redress the grievances of minorities in this country. This is a conservative court. And it will not just be on the question of civil rights. It will also be, and voting rights, it will also be a matter of the question of the future of the American presidency and its power. These are all issues which boil down to a very simple point. On the Supreme Court, there are two justices who will absolutely vote for whatever Donald Trump wants, Alito and Thomas. We know that there are two justices who are up in the air, so to speak. One is Chief Justice Roberts, and the other is Amy Coney Barrett. And we know that the balance of the court has three liberals, and it's a dicey situation. What will happen when the question of voting rights and expanding voting rights comes before the court? And what about redistricting? The efforts by the Republicans these days to redistrict, to ensure their control of the House of Representatives, is, to me, one of the grossest abuses of power. And yet we see it, we witness it. I want to be crystal clear. What Texas is doing is going to be counterbalanced by California. I recently made the decision to vote yes on Prop 50 because I believe it is vital to check what the president is seeking, which is unchecked power. Now, let me be clear that in deciding to vote yes on 50 in California, I am not abandoning the idea of this independent group that does the reapportionment. This is a temporary suspension in order to counterbalance what the president is doing. I want to make clear in this podcast that whether it is Venezuela or the Middle East or voting rights and civil rights, whether it has to do with the question of the expansion of presidential power, that these are issues which we need to take very seriously. And by the way, I do lose sleep over these things because I understand, and I hope you understand, the importance of checking an unchecked president. Let me conclude this morning, and I'm very excited. My wife is going to go with me, and she's taking me, in fact, to the Lyndon Johnson Library. I remember a president who failed, but I also remember a president who worked cooperatively with members of Congress, who worked with the Republicans, who made sure that his positions were clearly stated. By the way, a president who was a product of Congress. Remember, Lyndon Johnson was a product of Congress. He had been the majority leader of the United States Senate and had served in the House of Representatives. I point this out because this is a president who wants to bypass Congress, whether it's domestic policy or foreign policy. So we are now on the cusp of a real constitutional crisis, a crisis which needs to be addressed, which needs to be concerned of all Americans. We must all be concerned about it. All right, I'm going to take off for the library. I've offered you my commentary for today. I will be back tomorrow. And let me just conclude by thank you for tuning into another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am John Rothman. Make sure to follow along. Let me know your thoughts on the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and sharing an episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand, which is, of course, our goal. You can interact with me on LinkedIn, on Facebook, or by directly emailing me, as many of you do. And now, I want to say a special thank you to Gogo Zoger. Gogo, I was a little late this morning. I apologize for that. But when you're traveling and you're trying to get it all done, well, there have to be a few concessions made. This is John Rothman, You are listening to Around the Political World with John Rothman, and now off to the Lyndon Johnson Library. See you tomorrow.